My parents took me on a dream vacation and never came back. They left me alone in a foreign country with nothing but a note that said, "You're 17, old enough to survive." I am Sophia. I was 17 when my parents took me to Hawaii. They said it was a reset trip. I'd been struggling flunking math fighting with girls at school, skipping classes. My mom told people I was just moody. My dad didn't say much. He never did. But when they surprised me with 2 tickets and said it'd be just the three of us, no siblings, no work calls, I let myself believe they meant it. That maybe, just maybe, this was their way of trying. The first few days were awkward but hopeful. We ate ice cream by the beach, visited lava fields I didn't care about, took smiling photos for Facebook. My mom even held my hand while we waited in line for the boat to Maui. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe we're starting over. On the morning everything changed, we were supposed to fly back to the mainland. We had breakfast together at the hotel buffet. My mom wore her peach lipstick, the one she only used for important days. My dad had his usual black coffee, reading the paper without turning a page. Then right before checkout, my mom turned to me and said, "We're just going down the street to get some souvenirs. Be back in 15 minutes. I nodded, barely looking up. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to reply to my best friend who'd been asking how the forced family bonding was going. An hour passed, then 2, then 4. I asked the hotel staff if they'd seen them. The clerk at the front desk frowned and said, "Oh, the couple from room 302. They already checked out this morning." The key card no longer worked. I ran to the room. It was empty. My suitcase was gone. So was my passport, even my backpack, like I'd never been there at all. I called their phones straight to voicemail. Texts didn't deliver. I started panicking, pacing the sidewalk, crying and calling again and again. A stranger stopped to ask if I was okay. I wasn't. I went to the U.S. Embassy the next morning, desperate and sleepless. A woman in a navy blazer and tight bun listened carefully, then tapped something into her computer. After a long silence, she turned to me and said, "Your return flight was canceled. Your name's no longer listed under their health insurance or emergency contact. I'm so sorry." It hit me all at once, cold and sickening. They didn't just forget me. They removed me. They didn't leave me behind. They left me out. That night, I walked back to the hotel lobby, hoping maybe, just maybe, there'd be a note or message. Anything. The only thing waiting for me was in the pocket of my denim jacket, a small folded note, my mother's handwriting. "You're 17 now, old enough to survive." That's all it said. No apology, no explanation, just a sentence that sliced straight through me. I curled up behind a row of bushes outside a bakery and cried until I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how to get home. I didn't know if I had a home anymore. Somewhere in the distance, music played from a nearby cafe. A wedding, maybe. People laughing, glasses clinking, a family that still wanted each other. I remember curling my fingers around my phone, staring at the last photo we took together. My parents smiling under a palm tree, me standing between them. We looked like a family, but the cracks were always there. I just hadn't seen them. Later, much later, I'd remember flashes from the week before the trip. My dad sitting on the porch, gripping an envelope, white official, looking with final notice stamped in red. My mom pacing in the kitchen, whispering too loud for it to be casual, and a night where they thought I was asleep, but I heard them arguing. "We can't take her with us," my mom had snapped. "She'll ruin everything. She's not a child anymore. She's barely holding it together. So are we." I wanted to believe they were just venting, that it was stress a phase, but now sitting alone in a place where no one knew my name, I realized the truth. They'd planned this. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I didn't sleep the first few nights. Not really. I camped behind a bakery near the edge of town. It had a metal trash bin that radiated just enough heat to keep the wind from cutting through me. I curled up with my jacket zipped to the chin and my arms wrapped around my stomach, listening to the sounds of early morning deliveries. Glass bottles clinking, crates thudding, men shouting in a language I understood but felt distant from. I counted breaths, just to keep from crying. On the third morning, I got caught trying to steal a roll of bread left cooling on a tray by the back door. My fingers were numb, my mouth dry, and I didn't even hear the footsteps behind me until someone grabbed my wrist. I froze, eyes wide, expecting police trouble deportation. Instead, a woman stared down at me. She had thick silver hair pulled into a loose bun, flour dust on her apron, and eyes so sharp they seemed to cut through me. She didn't yell, didn't scold, just said, "If you're hungry, you work." Her name was Margaret. She was 68, ran the bakery alone, and had lived in that same apartment above it for more than 30 years. She let me wash dishes in the back, mop the floor, carry sacks of flour I could barely lift. That night, she handed me a folded blanket and pointed to a cot in the storage room. No explanation, no questions. It wasn't a bed. It wasn't warm, but it was safe. And in that moment, safe was everything. Margaret didn't ask about my family. She didn't need to. I think she knew. Days turned into weeks. I learned enough local slang to follow basic instructions. Wash, scrub, more flour. I copied her movements when she kneaded dough, watched her eyes when she adjusted the oven temperature without ever looking at the dial. Sometimes she spoke to me in quiet sentences, usually late at night while wiping the counter. One evening, while we were shaping loaves, she looked at my hands and said, "My daughter had hands like yours, always smelled like yeast, always too curious for her own good." I didn't ask what happened to her daughter. She never brought it up again. But from that night on, she started saving the misshaped loaves, the ones too ugly to sell. She left them wrapped in brown paper beside my cot like it was a ritual, like maybe she knew that love for someone like me needed to come in small, quiet pieces. I found a cracked laptop someone had thrown away behind a dumpster. Spent hours fixing it with borrowed parts from a local repair shop. Taught myself how to connect to public Wi-Fi. Signed up for an online GED program. I studied by the back door next to a fridge that hummed too loud. I did algebra homework while the scent of cinnamon and roasted sesame filled the air. Every time I got a quiz result back, I whispered the score under my breath like a prayer. I kept the jacket I wore the day my parents left, not because I wanted to, but because the note was still in the pocket. The one that said, "You're 17 old enough to survive." Some nights I'd unfold it just to prove that I was surviving, that I was still here, that their words hadn't broken me. But deep down, I wasn't sure who I was without them. I wasn't a daughter anymore, not a student, not a citizen, even just a girl who washed dishes in a place that didn't know her name. And yet somehow I was still alive. The first time I made money that didn't smell like yeast or sweat, it came from a stock I barely understood. It was a small Hawaiian shipping company. I'd read an article about their restructuring plan in a crumpled business journal someone left on a cafe table. Took a gamble, threw in the $200 I'd been saving for new shoes. It tripled in 2 weeks. That was the moment something shifted. Not in the world, but in me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning how to move. Margaret caught me one night with my laptop open and spreadsheets pulled up across the tiny back room. "You playing accountant now?" she teased. I shrugged, just curious. Truth was, I was doing more than that. I was obsessed. I devoured every free resource I could find online. YouTube lectures, translated business forums, and a scanned PDF of the essays of Warren Buffett I found through a sketchy download link. I read it 3 times in 1 week, scribbled notes in the margins of old receipts. His voice became my background music while I scrubbed pans or rolled dough. I took bigger risks. Some flopped, others exploded. By 20, I had clients. By 22, I had investors. I registered a small consulting business under a translated name. Nothing flashy, just enough to look legitimate. Word spread. I helped local vendors optimize supply chains, advised travelers on digital investments, and even created a short course for other undocumented young people looking to build income streams online. Margaret never asked how much I was making, but she noticed the changes. The new phone I bought her for Christmas, the espresso machine I quietly installed in the bakery, the way I paid off her gas bill without a word. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "You walk different now, less like you're waiting for something to fall on your head." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. I started sending money to youth shelters back on the mainland. Anonymous donations, always especially to programs in California. I told myself it was just about giving back. But deep down, I think part of me wanted them to notice, to wonder who's helping these girls the way we didn't. I never posted about my work, never told anyone my full name. I didn't want attention. I wanted freedom, peace, a life that no longer needed to explain itself to people who threw it away. But even with all the progress, even with clients' money and the strange sensation of being respected, I still carried the girl from the bakery in my bones. She was quiet now, but not gone. She showed up in moments of doubt and sleepless nights before big decisions in the way I still flinched when someone raised their voice too fast. I wasn't healed. I was building. And the thing about building from ashes is you remember every brick you lay. Every scar it covers, every crack you had to fill with your own hands. So when the past came calling, when a certain address appeared in a foreclosure listing, I didn't hesitate. I booked a one-way flight home. It was Margaret who saw it first. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her morning coffee glasses low on her nose, flipping through an old stack of international newspapers someone had left at the bakery. She didn't even look up when she said it, just quietly slid the paper across the table and tapped her finger on a small black box in the bottom corner. "You recognize that address?" I stared at it. The street, the city, the zip code. I knew every number. I had memorized that mailbox growing up. The creaky screen door, the crack in the driveway we were never allowed to step on. My parents' house in California, the one they bought after they left me. The one they swore up and down on social media was their fresh start. Now it was in foreclosure. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. There's a moment that comes when the universe hands you the very thing it once tore from you. It doesn't feel like victory. Not at first. It feels like silence, like still water right before a storm. I didn't tell Margaret what I was thinking. I didn't have to. She knew. We flew to California under business pretense. I went by my legal business name, a corporate identity I'd built over the years. Clean, neutral, untraceable. The auction was held in a sunny parking lot outside a county building. The crowd looked like a California cliché. Older men in pastel polos, investors with tablets, and retired couples in sun hats fanning themselves with brochures. No one looked at me twice. Margaret stood beside me holding the bidder card. I whispered the numbers in her ear, and she raised the card with calm, practiced ease. No emotion, just business. The price climbed faster than expected. Someone else wanted the house too, a man in khakis and boat shoes who squinted at us like we were in his way. Margaret didn't flinch when the final bid landed and the gavel hit. "Sold to bidder 173, the auctioneer's voice rang out. Margaret lowered the card slowly. We didn't celebrate. We didn't even look at each other. We just stood there while the auctioneer moved on and I let the reality wash over me. I owned their house, their living room, their fridge, their master bedroom with the window that faced the street. Every inch of the life they tried to build without me, it was now under my name. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something colder, sharper control. A week later, they got the notice. Certified mail. Legal language. 30 days. They must have stared at it in disbelief, not knowing who bought the house. Not knowing that the girl they abandoned at 17 had just signed the deed on their future, and I wasn't done. They asked for a meeting. Their lawyer called Margaret thinking she was the new owner, said my parents were willing to negotiate and wanted to speak directly to whoever bought the house. I agreed. The meeting was set at a small real estate office on the edge of town, neutral territory private. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in navy hair, pulled back sunglasses on, not hiding, just unreadable. They came in 2 minutes late. My mother entered first in a beige cardigan and oversized sunglasses, the kind meant to make you look fragile. My father trailed behind, holding a worn leather folder to his chest like it might protect him. They didn't recognize me. Not at first. They sat across the table, nodded stiffly, and waited. I didn't say a word. I just reached up slowly and pulled off my sunglasses. My mother's face drained of color. Her lips parted slightly like a word had gotten stuck in her throat. My father blinked twice, then looked down. Silence stretched thin and sharp between us. "You left me," I said, "in a foreign country with no money, no ID, no goodbye." My mother's hand twitched. We thought you'd hate us less if we just disappeared," she said, voice barely above a whisper. For a second, I saw something real in her eyes. Not regret, fear, maybe even shame. But then it hardened like it always did. You were impossible to live with. Always dramatic, always fighting. We were drowning. You were dragging us down. I nodded once slowly. You were supposed to be the lifeboat, I said, not the ones who throw people overboard. My father still hadn't looked up. Say something, I told him. Look at me and say it wasn't your choice. He opened his mouth, closed it, his hands tightened around the folder. Your mother thought. I don't care what she thought. He flinched. You didn't even try to stop her, I said. You let her erase me. His voice, when it finally came, was dry and brittle. I didn't think you'd survive. I stood up, calm, controlled. Well, I did, and now I own the house you live in. My mother blinked once. You're bluffing. I slid the signed deed across the table. Her hands hovered over it, trembling. Margaret stepped in from the hallway, then clipboard in hand, face unreadable. She nodded at them, professional and cold. We'll need the keys within 30 days, she said. You'll receive the official move-out timeline tomorrow. My mother looked between us like she was waking up from a bad dream. You can't do this. We're your parents. I stared at her. No, you were my parents and you made your decision. She started to cry. Not real tears. Not at first. It was the performance she'd always leaned on when things got messy. The fragile, wounded mother act. But I didn't move. Margaret placed a small envelope in front of her. These are the legal instructions, she said. We suggest you read them thoroughly. My father still hadn't spoken again. His eyes were glassy, now lost, but I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. I turned to leave. Wait, my mother said. Why now, after all these years? I paused at the door. Because I needed to see your faces when you realized I didn't need you to come back. I just needed you to know I came back. And then I walked out. They posted about me online, called me a liar, said I was brainwashed, said I showed up out of nowhere, heartless and vindictive, and stole their home. I didn't respond. Margaret asked if I'd seen the posts. I had. Let them talk, I told her. I'm too busy building something real. We converted the house within 4 months. The yellow siding got a fresh coat of paint. The cracked tile in the kitchen was replaced with soft oak laminate. We tore down the old live laugh love signs and replaced them with shelves of books, framed photographs, and soft blankets folded on every chair. We turned their master bedroom into a shared dorm space. 2 bunk beds, new mattresses, lavender pillows, a lockbox for every girl to store her own things. Margaret called it the second door because for some people the first one never opened. She started teaching again baking classes every Wednesday. Her students were girls like me, too young to be alone, too old to be anyone's responsibility. She taught them how to knead dough, how to trust their own hands, how to fail without quitting. We hosted our first open house in spring. 6 girls showed up that week. 2 were silent. 1 wouldn't make eye contact. Another cried when we gave her clean socks. Margaret just smiled and said, "Let them breathe. The rest comes later." That night, I stood in what used to be my parents' backyard. The air smelled like warm sugar and lemon soap. The porch light was soft and golden. Inside, someone was playing music through a cracked phone speaker. Laughter drifted out the window. Real laughter, loud, unapologetic. Margaret stepped beside me holding a mug of tea. "Still feel like you don't have a home?" she asked. I looked around. I saw light in every window shoes by the door, a girl brushing her hair in the hallway mirror, another curled up on the couch, finally asleep. And I knew. This isn't just a home, I said. It's where we all begin again. If you think this is wild so far, just wait until you hear what I said when they begged me for mercy. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and let's dive into this story of betrayal, survival, and the comeback they never saw coming. Sophia's journey teaches her that resilience and self-reliance can transform pain into power. Abandoned by her parents at 17 in a foreign land with only a note declaring her old enough to survive, she faces betrayal's raw sting. Yet through sheer determination, she builds a life from nothing, finding safety with Margaret and purpose in learning and entrepreneurship. The lesson isn't about revenge, though. Buying her parents' foreclosed home feels like poetic justice. It's about reclaiming her narrative. Sophia learns that survival demands more than enduring. It requires creating meaning from loss. By turning their house into a haven for other lost girls, she redefines home not as a place tied to those who failed her, but as a space she builds for herself and others. Her story shows that while betrayal can fracture identity, it also opens paths to self-discovery. Sophia's triumph lies in realizing she doesn't need her parents' validation to thrive. Instead, she finds strength in quiet acts of defiance, educating herself, helping others, and forging a community from shared resilience, proving that the deepest wounds can become the foundation for a life of purpose and independence.
Growing up, Michael always made sure I knew my place. He was the golden child, valedictorian, full scholarship to MIT, the one mom bragged about to neighbors. I was the practical one, as they called it. The one who worked summers at the warehouse while Michael interned at Fortune 500 companies. Sarah's different, Mom would explain to relatives. Not everyone can be brilliant like Michael. He's more hands-on. The comments stung, but I learned to smile and nod. What they didn't know was that those warehouse summers taught me more about business than Michael's theoretical classes ever could. I watched how supply chains worked, how margins moved, how small inefficiencies cost millions. While Michael studied case studies, I lived them. After college, Michael launched TechFlow Solutions with his MIT buddies. AI-powered logistics optimization for warehouses. Ironically, exactly the industry I knew inside and out. The company exploded. Within 3 years, they had contracts with Amazon, FedEx, and Walmart. Michael became the family success story. My son, the tech entrepreneur, Dad would announce at every gathering. 26 years old and already worth 8 figures. I kept working warehouse jobs, moving between companies, learning systems. Michael would pat my shoulder condescendingly at family events. Still doing the manual labor, huh? Well, someone has to keep the wheels turning for us innovators. What Michael never bothered to ask was why I kept switching warehouse jobs. He never wondered why I had such detailed knowledge of logistics systems, or why I asked so many specific questions about his algorithms during family dinners. He was too busy enjoying being the genius. The truth was, I'd been quietly building something. Those warehouse jobs weren't just jobs, they were research. Every company I worked for gave me deeper insight into the problems TechFlow claimed to solve. And I started noticing gaps. Big ones. By age 24, I'd developed my own logistics optimization system. Not AI-powered like Michael's. Something better. Something that actually understood how warehouses really worked because I'd worked in them. Something that increased efficiency by 34% instead of TechFlow's claimed 12%. I started small. A consulting firm with warehouse efficiency solutions. 1 client became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became Fortune 100 companies quietly switching from TechFlow to my system because it actually worked better. Within 2 years, my consulting firm was generating $50 million annually. I reinvested everything into technology development and strategic acquisitions. But I kept quiet about it. Wore the same clothes to family gatherings. Drove the same old Honda. Let them think I was still just a warehouse worker. The beauty of my position was that Michael never saw me as competition. When his company needed additional funding for expansion, I made sure my investment firm, hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies, was first in line. Michael thought he was getting money from some anonymous venture capital group. He had no idea his failure sister was bankrolling his entire operation. By the time this Thanksgiving rolled around, I owned 73% of TechFlow Solutions. Michael owned 15%. His MIT buddies split the remaining 12%. But according to the paperwork, he was still CEO of his own company, still the face of his success story. The Thanksgiving dinner started normally. Michael arrived in his new Tesla, talking loudly about his latest contracts. Just closed a $40 million deal with UPS, he announced to the entire family. TechFlow is revolutionizing the industry. Everyone gathered around him, asking questions, praising his genius. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, picking at my turkey. Sarah, how's the warehouse work going? Aunt Linda asked, the question clearly meant to contrast with Michael's success. Same as always, I replied. Steady work. Michael laughed. That's Sarah. Reliable but not ambitious. Not everyone can build an empire, right, sis? The conversation continued around me. Michael's company, Michael's success, Michael's bright future. Cousin Jake, who worked in Michael's marketing department, kept throwing glances my way with obvious pity. Then Uncle Robert brought up the topic that changed everything. Michael, I keep hearing about partnership opportunities in tech. Jake here has been talking about maybe investing in something bigger. You should consider bringing in some family money. Michael's eyes lit up. Actually, I've been thinking about that. TechFlow is ready for our next growth phase. We're looking at expanding into autonomous vehicle logistics. Could use some additional family investment. How much are we talking? Dad asked, leaning forward with interest. Well, for a significant stake, maybe 5%, we'd be looking at about 10 million. But that's for serious investors only. People who understand the tech industry. Jake practically bounced in his seat. I've got about 2 million I could invest. Been saving for something big like this. That could work, Michael nodded approvingly. Though you'd need to understand this is serious business. Not for everyone. That's when Jake looked directly at me. Good thing Sarah's not interested in business partnerships. No offense, but you'd need real money for something like this. Michael followed Jake's gaze and laughed. Yeah, no offense, Sarah, but this kind of investment opportunity isn't really for your situation. What do you mean? I asked innocently. I mean, this is a $10 million conversation, Michael said, still chuckling. You work at a warehouse. This is venture capital level stuff. Cousin Jake nodded enthusiastically. You're too poor to be a business partner, he said with a grin. Stick to your warehouse job. The table erupted in laughter. Even Mom smiled. Jake's just being honest, dear. Michael's company is for serious investors. I looked around the table at their faces. Michael's patronizing smirk. Jake's obvious pleasure at putting me in my place. Dad's approving nod at what he saw as appropriate boundaries. Mom's gentle but dismissive smile. You're absolutely right, I said quietly, returning to my turkey. I should stick to what I know. The conversation moved on. Michael and Jake spent the next hour planning Jake's investment. Michael explained how Jake would get 0.2% of the company for his 2 million. A steal for family, he said generously. I listened to every word while finishing my dinner in silence. Michael had no idea he was selling Jake shares in a company that I controlled. Jake had no idea he was about to invest in a business that could disappear overnight if I decided to pull my funding. After dinner, I helped Mom clean dishes while the men continued their business talk in the living room. Don't feel bad about not being included, Mom whispered as we loaded the dishwasher. Michael's just trying to protect you from losing money you don't have. I appreciate that, I said, meaning it in a way she couldn't understand. I left early, citing a long day at work tomorrow. Michael barely looked up from his conversation with Jake to wave goodbye. See you at Christmas, sis. Maybe by then you'll have gotten that promotion to supervisor. The laughter followed me out the door. I drove home to my modest apartment, the same one I'd lived in for 3 years, despite being able to afford a mansion. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. My phone showed 17 missed calls from my portfolio manager, David Chin. He'd been trying to reach me all evening, probably with updates on the quarterly reports. David managed my investment portfolio through Meridian Capital, the firm I'd used to acquire my stake in TechFlow. I called him back at 9 p.m. Sarah, thank God, David's voice was urgent. I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to discuss the TechFlow situation. What about it? Their Q3 reports came in today. The company is in serious trouble. Revenue projections are down 40% from last quarter. They're burning through cash faster than projected, and their main competitor just launched a superior product. Michael Kim doesn't know it yet, but TechFlow is about 6 months from bankruptcy without additional funding. I wasn't surprised. I'd been watching TechFlow's real numbers for months through my majority ownership. Michael was brilliant at marketing and raising money, but terrible at actual business operations. His AI system looked impressive in demos but failed in real-world applications. Companies were quietly switching to competitors, including my consulting firm, but Michael was too focused on fundraising to notice. What are my options? I asked. Well, you own 73% of the company. You could inject additional capital to keep it afloat, but honestly it would be throwing good money after bad. The technology gap is too wide to close. Or, you could liquidate your position. Withdraw your investment and let the company restructure. Michael would lose control, but the technology and employee base might be valuable to an acquirer. I thought about Michael's laughing face at dinner, Jake's dismissive comments, the family's automatic assumption that I was too poor and stupid to understand business. David, I want you to arrange an immediate liquidation of all Meridian Capital holdings in TechFlow Solutions. Full withdrawal. There was a pause. Sarah, that's $94 million. If we pull that out, the company will collapse within weeks. Are you sure? I'm sure. And the timing? We could structure this over several months to minimize. No. I want it done first thing Monday morning. Full withdrawal, immediate notice to TechFlow management. That will cause a lot of chaos. Michael Kim will be completely blindsided. That's the point. David sighed. All right. I'll have the paperwork ready by 8 a.m. Monday. This will definitely make the business news. TechFlow's collapse will be pretty public. Good. One more thing. I want Jake Morrison's pending investment blocked. Put TechFlow in emergency restructuring before he can transfer any funds. Consider it done. Sarah, can I ask why the sudden decision? I thought about how to explain it. Let's just say I had dinner with the CEO tonight, and I've decided I don't want to be in business with him anymore. Monday morning, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when my phone rang at exactly 8:47 a.m. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Then again. By 9:15 I had 12 missed calls from Michael and 6 from Jake. Finally I answered. Sarah. Michael's voice was panicked, shouting. Sarah, I need to talk to you right now. What's wrong? I asked calmly. Everything. My company, TechFlow. Our main investor just pulled out. $94 million gone. They gave notice this morning and they want everything liquidated immediately. Oh no. That sounds terrible. IT is terrible. We're completely fucked. I don't understand what happened. Meridian Capital was supposed to be a long-term partner. Now they're saying the investment was tied to performance metrics and we didn't meet targets. I could hear papers shuffling in the background, other voices talking rapidly. Michael was clearly at the office, probably in an emergency meeting. I'm so sorry to hear that, I said. Is there anything I can do to help? What? No, Sarah. This is a $94 million problem. I needed to tell someone in the family. Dad's going to kill me. I'm going to lose everything. What about Jake's investment? Didn't he say he had $2 million? Michael's laugh was bitter. Jake? His money is blocked. The company's in emergency restructuring. Nobody can invest now until we figure out this mess. His $2 million wouldn't save us anyway. We need the full 94 back or something close to it. Have you tried calling other investors? Sarah, you don't understand. This isn't about finding $2 or $3 million. This is about replacing a $94 million investment that got pulled overnight. There aren't that many people in the world who have that kind of money just sitting around. That does sound difficult, I agreed. Through the phone, I could hear someone calling Michael's name urgently. I have to go, he said. The lawyers are here. Sarah, don't tell the family about this yet, okay? I need to figure out if there's any way to save the company first. Of course. Good luck. I hung up and finished my coffee. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from Jake. Did Michael call you? Something's wrong with TechFlow. My investment got blocked. I texted back. He mentioned some investor problems. Sounds complicated. Jake. Complicated? Sarah, I was going to make serious money on this. This was my chance to get rich like Michael. Me, I'm sure you'll find other opportunities. Jake, easy for you to say. You're not losing $2 million. I almost pointed out that Jake wasn't losing $2 million. He never had the chance to invest it. But I decided to let him stay angry. By Wednesday, the news broke publicly. TechFlow Solutions, the revolutionary AI logistics startup, was filing for emergency restructuring after their primary investor withdrew $94 million in funding. Michael's face was all over the tech blogs, looking haggard and defeated. The articles were brutal. Startup founder loses $100 million company overnight. TechFlow Solutions, from rising star to bankruptcy in 72 hours. The fastest rise and fall in tech history. Michael stopped answering my calls. Jake stopped texting. The family group chat went silent. By Friday, I received a call from my consulting firm's CFO. Sarah, you're not going to believe this. 3 of TechFlow's biggest clients just reached out. They want to switch to our system immediately. They're offering a combined contract worth $67 million annually. Which clients? UPS, Amazon, and FedEx. Apparently TechFlow's system was never actually working as advertised. They were manually correcting the AI recommendations behind the scenes. Now that TechFlow is gone, they need real solutions. I smiled. Accept all 3 contracts. And promote Jennifer to head of client relations. She'll handle the transitions. This is going to put us in the top 5 logistics consulting firms in the country. I know. That weekend Dad called me directly. Sarah, have you talked to Michael recently? A few days ago. He mentioned some business troubles. Business troubles? Dad's voice was strained. Sarah, he lost everything. The entire company. He had to move back in with us. He's devastated. I'm sorry to hear that. The thing is, he keeps talking about this investor Meridian Capital. Says they destroyed his company for no reason. He's talking about lawsuits, but the lawyers say there's nothing he can do. The investment was legitimate and they had the right to withdraw. That sounds frustrating. Sarah, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me. My heart rate didn't change. Of course, Dad. Michael is convinced there's something personal about this. He thinks someone specifically targeted his company. He's been going through the investor documentation, trying to figure out who actually owns Meridian Capital. Did he find anything? That's what I'm calling about. The company is owned by a series of shell corporations, but there's a name that keeps appearing in the paperwork. Someone named S. Morrison. Sarah Morrison. I paused for exactly 3 seconds. Dad, Morrison is a pretty common name. I know. But Michael is fixated on this. He keeps saying it's too much of a coincidence. A Morrison destroying his company right after Jake Morrison was supposed to invest. What are you asking me exactly? Dad's voice became gentle. Sarah, honey, I need you to tell me straight. Do you know anything about this Meridian Capital situation? I looked around my modest apartment. At my second-hand furniture and 10-year-old TV. At the warehouse uniform hanging by the door for my shift tomorrow morning. Dad, do you really think I have $94 million to invest in anything? The question hung in the air. Dad's silence stretched long enough that I could hear him thinking it through. His daughter who worked in a warehouse. Who drove a Honda Civic. Who lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and worried about grocery bills. Finally he laughed. You're right. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Michael's just desperate to blame someone. The idea that you could be involved in high-level venture capital is, well, it's ridiculous. It's okay, Dad. Michael's going through a lot. He is. Listen, could you maybe call him? He needs family support right now. And maybe don't mention Jake's investment thing. He's pretty bitter about that falling through. Of course. I'll call him tonight. Thanks, Sarah. You're a good sister. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking. Michael was smarter than I'd given him credit for. He'd traced the ownership back far enough to find my name. If he kept digging, if he hired the right forensic accountants, he might eventually connect all the dots. But he wouldn't. Because the one thing Michael could never overcome was his absolute certainty that his little sister was too poor and stupid to outmaneuver him. I called Michael that evening. Sarah. His voice was hollow, exhausted. Dad told me what happened. I'm so sorry. Yeah, well. Everything's gone. 5 years of work just gone. What will you do now? I don't know. Start over, I guess. Maybe get a job at another tech company. Pay off debts. Mom and Dad are letting me stay here for a while. That's good. Family support is important. Sarah, can I ask you something? Sure. Last week at Thanksgiving, when Jake said that thing about you being too poor to be a business partner, I laughed at you. I remember. I feel like shit about that now. Here I am, 30 years old, living with my parents again. And you've got a steady job in your own place. Maybe being practical isn't such a bad thing. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Everyone has ups and downs, I said. You'll figure it out. Yeah. Listen, I'm going to keep investigating this Meridian Capital thing. Something about the timing feels personal, you know? Like someone wanted to destroy me specifically. Maybe it was just bad business. Maybe. But if I find out someone deliberately sabotaged my company. Michael's voice hardened. If someone in our family was involved somehow, That would be unforgivable. Of course it would. Anyway, thanks for calling. It means a lot. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and checked my bank balances. Between my consulting firm and various investments, my net worth had crossed $400 million sometime last month. Tomorrow I'd go back to my warehouse job. I'd wear my uniform and punch my time card and let my coworkers see me as just another employee trying to pay the bills. But tonight I allowed myself a small smile. The family that had spent 15 years dismissing me as the poor failure was about to learn exactly how expensive that mistake had been. Michael's phone was still ringing. And it would keep ringing until he figured out what I'd known all along. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one with the most power to destroy you. He just had to be smart enough to see it. And smart enough to admit that his practical little sister had been playing a game he never even knew existed. The invitation to host Thanksgiving dinner had been Mom's idea, though she'd presented it as doing me a favor. "Since you're so proud of your little apartment," she'd said over the phone, "maybe it's time the family saw how you're really living." I should have recognized the trap. In 28 years, my parents had never expressed genuine interest in visiting my home. But I was feeling optimistic about finally having something to show them. A beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in Harbor Heights, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, granite countertops, and a view of the harbor that real estate agents called million-dollar worthy. What they didn't know was that I'd been working in property management and real estate investment for the past 4 years, building a portfolio that started with small residential properties and had grown into something substantial. The Harbor Heights apartment wasn't just where I lived. It was part of a larger strategy that they'd never bothered to ask about. Growing up, I was always the family disappointment. My older sister Rebecca was the doctor, my younger brother Kyle was the engineer, and I was the one who never found my direction. When I dropped out of law school to work in real estate, Dad had been devastated. "Real estate," he'd said with the same tone he might use for sewage management. "That's not a career, it's what people do when they can't do anything else." For years, every family gathering included subtle digs about my unstable income and lack of real profession. They assumed I was barely scraping by, working as some kind of rental agent or property showing assistant. I'd stopped trying to explain what I actually did, acquisitions, portfolio management, investment analysis, because their eyes would glaze over. They'd already decided I was the failure, and contradictory evidence just bounced off. But Harbor Heights was different. This was a neighborhood where successful people lived. Doctors, lawyers, executives, entrepreneurs. The kind of people my parents respected. I thought maybe, finally, seeing where I lived would shift their perception of my success. I spent 2 days preparing for Thanksgiving dinner. I bought the expensive organic turkey, the imported wine, the artisanal desserts from the bakery they always mentioned loving. I cleaned my apartment until it sparkled, arranged fresh flowers, and set the table with the good china I'd been collecting. They arrived an hour late, which was typical. Dad immediately started examining everything with the suspicious air of someone looking for evidence of fraud. Mom wandered around touching surfaces like she was checking for dust. Rebecca and Kyle seemed impressed despite themselves, though they tried to hide it. "Nice place," Kyle admitted, looking out at the harbor view. "Must cost a fortune to rent." "Actually, probably splitting it with roommates," Dad interrupted, not looking up from where he was examining my sound system. "Only way someone in your situation could afford this area." I started to correct him, but Mom cut me off. "Where should we put our coats?" "Somewhere that won't be in the way when your roommates come home." "I don't have roommates. I live here alone." Dad snorted. "Sure you do. What are you paying $3,000 a month for?" "That's more than some people's mortgage payments." "I'm not paying rent actually. Subletting then," Rebecca said with authority. "That makes sense. Probably found someone who needed a temporary arrangement." I gave up trying to explain and focused on getting dinner ready. Let them think whatever they wanted. The meal would speak for itself and maybe they'd finally see that I was doing well. But as dinner progressed, their comments got sharper. Dad criticized the wine selection, trying too hard. Mom questioned whether the turkey was really organic or just expensive. And Rebecca made pointed observations about people who live beyond their means. The breaking point came during dessert. I'd bought a beautiful tart from Delacroix Patisserie, the same bakery where Mom always bragged about getting Rebecca's wedding cake. cost $80, but I wanted everything to be perfect. This is good, Kyle said, taking a second bite. Where'd you get it? Delacroix Patisserie, I said, hoping Mom would recognize the name. She did. That place is incredibly expensive. How much did you spend on this dinner? $1,000? $1,500. I wanted to make it special. With what money? Dad's voice got sharp. You're living in an apartment that probably costs more than I make in a month, buying groceries that cost more than most people's car payments, and you expect us to believe you can afford this? I can afford it. My business is doing well. What business? Rebecca laughed. You work for a real estate company. You're an employee, not a business owner. I tried to explain about property investment, about building equity through strategic acquisitions, about how real estate could generate passive income. But Dad was already shaking his head. Real estate investment, he said the words like they tasted bad. You mean flipping houses? Scamming desperate sellers? That's not investing, that's gambling. It's not flipping houses. I buy rental properties and... With what money? Mom demanded. You didn't have any money when you dropped out of law school. You didn't inherit anything. So where did you get the capital for these supposed investments? I could have shown them my portfolio spreadsheets, my bank statements, my property deeds. But something in their tone told me it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided this was all some kind of elaborate scam or delusion. Maybe we should talk about something else, Kyle suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But Dad wasn't done. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor view. You know what I think? I think you're in debt up to your eyeballs. I think you're renting this place month to month with credit cards, buying expensive food with credit cards, and playing dress up in a neighborhood you can't afford. Dad, that's not. Don't lie to me. His voice got louder. I've seen this before. People who can't handle money getting in over their heads, pretending to be successful until the whole thing comes crashing down. You're headed for bankruptcy and you're too proud to admit it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom was nodding along with everything Dad said. Rebecca looked embarrassed but not contradictory. Kyle was studying his dessert plate like it held the secrets of the universe. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. They'd come to my home, eaten my food, enjoyed my hospitality, and concluded that it was all evidence of my moral and financial failure. I'm not in debt, I said quietly. Then prove it, Dad challenged. Show me your bank statements. Show me your income documentation. Show me how someone with your job history can afford to live like this. Before I could respond, he was walking around my living room again, but this time with the demeanor of a detective gathering evidence. He picked up mail from my side table and started reading return addresses. Harbor Heights Property Management, he read aloud. Probably your landlord sending eviction notices. Dad, please don't. Metropolitan Investment Group. Debt collectors, I bet. He was getting worked up now, his voice rising with each piece of mail. City of Harbor Heights Tax Assessment Office. Probably threatening liens on property you pretend to own. Mom joined in, examining my bookshelf. Look at all these real estate books. Property investment strategies, building rental income, real estate portfolio management. She's been reading get-rich-quick schemes. Those aren't get-rich-quick books. They're fantasy, Rebecca said with the certainty that comes from a medical degree. People who actually have money don't need to read books about how to get money. Dad had moved to the kitchen and was opening my cabinets, like he expected to find evidence of my deception hidden behind the cereal boxes. Everything here is too expensive for someone in your situation. The cookware, the appliances, even the coffee maker. You're living a lifestyle that doesn't match your income level. Maybe that's because you don't know what my income level actually is. I know exactly what real estate agents make, he said dismissively. And it's not enough for this. I'm not a real estate agent. I'm a property acquisition specialist and portfolio manager. He waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. Fancy titles don't change reality. You're living beyond your means in a neighborhood where you don't belong, and sooner or later, it's going to catch up with you. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were true, but because of how confidently he said them. How certain he was that I was failing, despite all evidence to the contrary. You're too broke for this neighborhood, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of my apartment. Stop pretending you belong here with successful people. You're embarrassing yourself and embarrassing this family. Mom nodded emphatically. We didn't raise you to live a lie. Find an apartment you can actually afford and stop this charade before you ruin your credit permanently. I kept eating my dessert quietly, letting their words wash over me. Part of me wanted to pull out my laptop and show them my property management software, my investment portfolio, my monthly revenue reports. But a bigger part of me realized it wouldn't matter. They'd find a way to dismiss or minimize anything I showed them. Are you even listening to us? Rebecca asked. This is serious. You could lose everything. I looked up at her. I'm listening. Then why aren't you responding? Why aren't you defending yourself? Because you've already made up your minds. Dad returned to the table, his face flushed with frustration. We're trying to help you. We're trying to save you from making a mistake that could ruin your life. But you have to be honest with us about your situation. My situation is that I'm a successful property investor who owns multiple rental properties and lives comfortably within my means. That's delusional, Mom said flatly. People like you don't become successful property investors. That takes money, connections, experience, things you don't have. People like me? She gestured vaguely. People who couldn't finish law school. People who've never held a stable job. People who don't understand how money works. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Everyone turned to look toward the entrance. Expecting someone? Cal asked. I wasn't, but I was grateful for the interruption. I'll see who it is. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A middle-aged man in a business suit stood in the hallway, holding a folder and checking his watch. I didn't recognize him, but his professional appearance suggested he wasn't a random visitor. I opened the door. Can I help you, Miss Chin? I'm Robert Martinez from Harbor Heights Property Management. I apologize for stopping by during the holiday, but we had a maintenance emergency in Building C that requires your approval for the repair costs. The contractor needs authorization tonight to start work tomorrow morning. I could hear my family's conversation stop completely behind me. The silence was so absolute that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Of course, I said. What's the situation? Burst pipe in Unit 12C flooded 3 apartments. The water damage is extensive, and we need approval for emergency repairs plus temporary relocation costs for the affected tenants. The estimate is about $40,000 for repairs and another $15,000 for temporary housing. He handed me the folder. As I opened it and reviewed the documentation, I could feel my family's stares boring into my back. This looks reasonable, I said, signing the authorization forms. How long before the tenants can move back in? About 2 weeks if we start tomorrow. I'll coordinate with the insurance adjuster and keep you updated on the progress. Perfect. And Robert? Make sure the affected tenants know we'll cover any additional expenses they incur during the displacement. Hotel meals, laundry, transportation, whatever they need. Will do. Thank you for the quick response, Ms. Chin. Happy Thanksgiving. I closed the door and turned around to face my family. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to shock. Who was that? Dad asked, his voice much quieter than it had been moments before. The property manager for Harbor Heights. Property manager for what? For the building. And the 3 adjacent buildings. The silence stretched out for what felt like minutes. Rebecca was the first to speak. You mean, you manage those buildings? I own them. More silence. Dad sat down heavily in his chair, still holding a piece of mail from my side table. You own this building, Mom said slowly, like she was testing the words. And the one next to it. And the 2 across the street. Kyle leaned forward. When you said you weren't paying rent. I meant I'm not paying rent. It's hard to pay rent to yourself. Dad looked down at the mail in his hand, the envelope from Harbor Heights Property Management that he'd assumed was an eviction notice. What's this then? Monthly revenue reports. Occupancy rates, maintenance schedules, profit and loss statements. He opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper. His eyes moved across the numbers, and I watched his expression change from skepticism to disbelief to something approaching shock. This says monthly rental income of. He stopped and looked up at me. This can't be right. $43,000 in November. It was a good month. We had high occupancy and minimal maintenance costs. Rebecca grabbed the papers from Dad's hands and started reading. Net profit after expenses, $28,000. For 1 month? Like I said, it was a good month. Mom was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was an alien. How long have you owned these buildings? I bought the first one 3 years ago. The others I acquired over the past 18 months as they came on the market. With what money? Dad's question came out as barely a whisper. I started with a small down payment on a duplex in the University District. Lived in one unit, rented out the other. Used the rental income and my salary to save for the next property. Repeated the process, gradually moving up to larger properties with better cash flow potential. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out a folder I kept there. These are the property deeds. Harbor Heights buildings A through D. All owned free and clear as of 6 months ago. Kyle took the folder and started flipping through the documents. Free and clear? You mean no mortgages? The cash flow from the first 3 buildings generated enough income to buy the 4th building outright. Debt-free ownership was always the goal. Dad was still staring at the revenue reports. You make more in a month than I make in a year. Some months are better than others. But yes, the business has been successful. The room fell quiet again. I could see them all processing this information, trying to reconcile their assumptions about my failure with the evidence in front of them. Rebecca was the first to recover. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But every time I mentioned property investment or real estate business, you dismissed it as gambling or get-rich-quick schemes. But you could have shown us documentation, Mom protested. You could have proved you were successful. When would have been a good time to prove myself to people who had already decided I was a failure? At Christmas dinner when you lectured me about finding a real job? At Rebecca's birthday when you introduced me to her friends as the one who couldn't finish law school? At Kyle's graduation when you told people I was still figuring things out? They exchanged glances and I could see the uncomfortable recognition in their faces. They remembered those conversations differently than I did, but they couldn't deny the pattern. Dad set down the revenue reports and looked around my apartment with new eyes. So all of this is paid for with income from my real estate portfolio. The furniture, the art, the kitchen appliances, all purchased with money I earned from properties I own. And dinner tonight? Was expensive because I wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving with my family. I can afford expensive dinners now. Kyle was still reading through the property deeds. These buildings are worth millions. About $12 million in total according to the most recent appraisals. Mom sat down like her legs had given out. $12 million. The business is worth more than the buildings themselves. The rental income, the long-term leases, the property management contracts. It's a complete real estate operation. Rebecca shook her head slowly. And we just spent 2 hours telling you that you're living beyond your means. And that I'm embarrassing the family by pretending to belong in this neighborhood. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This was the silence of people realizing they'd made a fundamental error, not just in facts but in judgment. I think, Dad said finally, I owe you an apology. You owe me more than that. He looked up, surprised by the sharpness in my voice. You owe me an explanation. You owe me an explanation for why you assumed the worst about me for years. Why you never asked detailed questions about my work. Why you dismissed every attempt I made to explain my business. Why you decided I was a failure and then interpreted everything I did through that lens. Mom started to say something but I held up my hand. I dropped out of law school because I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. But instead of asking me what I did want to do, you decided it meant I was directionless. I started working in real estate and instead of asking me to explain the industry, you assumed it was a dead-end job. I bought my first property and instead of congratulating me, you warned me about getting in over my head. Rebecca cleared her throat. We didn't understand. You didn't want to understand. Understanding would have required admitting that maybe I knew something you didn't. Maybe the family disappointment had actually found something she was good at. I walked to the window and looked out at the harbor view, the same view Dad had been admiring earlier while telling me I couldn't afford to live here. Do you know what the hardest part has been? Not building the business. That was just work. The hardest part has been succeeding while my own family was rooting for me to fail. Do you know how isolating it is to achieve something you're proud of and have nowhere to share that pride? Kyle set down the property deeds. We weren't rooting for you to fail. Weren't you? Every family gathering, you all seemed disappointed that I wasn't struggling more. Like my success was somehow inconvenient for the narrative you'd created about me. Dad was staring at his hands. We were worried about you. We thought you were making poor decisions. Based on what evidence? Based on actually looking at my financial situation? Based on asking detailed questions about my business model? Or based on the assumption that because I didn't follow your prescribed path, I must be failing? The questions hung in the air unanswered. Because the truth was they'd never looked for evidence. They'd made their assumptions and stuck with them, filtering everything through their preconceptions. Mom wiped her eyes and I realized she was crying. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo 4 years of being treated like the family charity case. Sorry doesn't give me back the family support I needed when I was building this business. Sorry doesn't erase the constant stress of knowing that my own parents thought I was a failure. Robert Martinez knocked again and I went to answer it. He handed me another set of documents. Emergency repair approval for Building D, he explained. HVAC system failure. We need to replace the entire unit before tomorrow or the tenants will be without heat over the weekend. I reviewed and signed the authorization for another $15,000 in repairs. After he left, I turned back to my family. That's how my business works, I said. Problems come up, decisions need to be made quickly and tenants depend on me to solve them. It's not gambling or get-rich-quick schemes. It's real business with real responsibilities. Dad stood up and walked over to me. Can you forgive us? I looked at him for a long moment. I can forgive you. But I can't forget how this felt. And I can't pretend that everything goes back to normal now that you know I'm successful. What does that mean? It means that maybe we need to rebuild our relationship from scratch. Maybe you need to get to know who I actually am instead of who you assumed I was. Rebecca joined us by the window. We'd like that. We'd like to know who you really are. I smiled for the first time all evening. I'm someone who owns 4 apartment buildings and makes more money in a month than most people make in a year. I'm someone who employs 12 people and provides housing for over 200 families. I'm someone who built a business from nothing and now has enough financial security to afford $80 desserts without thinking twice. And, Kyle added, reading from one of my business cards he'd found on the side table, you're the CEO of Harbor Heights Property Group. I'm also someone who invited her family for Thanksgiving dinner because she wanted to share her success with the people she loves. Even when those people spent the evening telling her she was living beyond her means. We stood there looking out at the harbor as the sun set over the water. The view really was worth millions, I should know since I'd had it appraised. Can we start over? Mom asked quietly. We can try. Dad picked up one of the property deeds again. Would you be willing to tell us about your business? Really tell us, I mean. Help us understand how it works. I'd like that. And for the first time in years I meant it. The validation felt good, but what felt better was the possibility that maybe, finally, my family might see me for who I really was instead of who they'd decided I should be. Later that evening, after they'd left, I stood in my apartment. My apartment that I owned, in my building that I owned, in my neighborhood where I definitely belonged, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time with my family. I felt proud.